Hi everyone, my name is Irene Ojo-Felix. I'm the editorial director at models.com, and I'm here with a very special guest, two very special guests from SHOWstudio. You guys take it away.
Excellent. Well, I'm Nick Knight. I'm an image maker and the director of SHOWstudio.
Hi, my name is Tom Wandrag. I'm a creative technologist and digital artist and co-founder of creative technology studio New Plane, along with Nick Knight.
And we're here for a very special conversation, given that this seems to be the crux of where fashion is really colliding with a special form of technology. And right now, the topic of conversation has been AI. All this season, we've been going to agencies, we've been talking to creatives and the models themselves, and it's the #1 conversation on everyone's lips. There seems to be a lot of anxiety around it, a lot of fear, and a lot of interest too. So I thought that, what better conversationalist to talk to than you two to kind of give us an idea of where we should be or what we should be thinking about when it comes to this technology. I wanted to kind of just start with the basics and get an idea of like what kind of drew you both to AI and what kind of fascinates you most about the technology.
I mean, you have to think that photography has always been a technical medium. I mean, that's sort of where it comes from, science, and that's sort of its basis, really. When it first started, it was very much, painting and the world of art looked at it in the same way that I guess a lot of people are looking at AI as a sort of, it's a mechanical medium. It can never hope to represent the beauty of humanity and blah, blah, blah. That was very much how photographers were talked about when photography first started. And photography spent a long time imitating painting, really to sort of, show that it was an art form. So you look at those early photographs from the photo successionists and people like Steichen and those beautiful, brilliant photographers from the first half of the last century. You're looking at people who are almost cosplaying painting. There's a picture of Steichen and he's dressed like he's got a palette and he's got a sort of floppy beret on and a gown. He looks like a painter. And very much, in any case, you have people like Anne Brigman, who photographed up in this, I think, Sierra Nevada, did nudes and trees up there, beautiful, but the film at the time couldn't record blue. So she had to use pencil lead as graphite and rub it onto the negative to kind of get the clouds. So it was kind of a bit painting in any case. But from your part, I do completely understand anxiety around it, and it's normal and good that there is, because people need to question things that happen. It's a huge cultural change, and of course any huge cultural change will quite rightly evoke a lot of discussion, and I think it's really good we're talking about this. You can compare it to, as I have done, to the advent of photography, or you could take it back, because I think it's bigger than just that, to be honest. I think it's more profound. You could take it back to the Industrial Revolution, you could take it back to the beginning of writing if you want. And that's quite an interesting thing, because now we look at writing as something we all do, and it's all, it's part of how we communicate. But at one time, it was only people, it was the sort of monks in the abbeys who were scripts and scribes, and the only people who could write. And when it first started to become a little bit more popular, the upper classes were very worried about what the proletariat would do. They got hold of the power of writing. But we didn't ban the pen, and we didn't ban the book. So I think, these things are, banning things and just sort of turning your back on things isn't the best approach. Talking about them and discussing them, I think, is helpful. There's been an awful lot of really bad things written.
Yeah.
A lot of very, very unpleasant, anti-human, anti-people things written. Writing has been used in many ways to incite violence, to change society, but it's been used to write beautiful poetry and been used to write great love stories and things that stay with us and our memories and our stories, etc., etc. So it's a skill and something that has helped the world understand itself. So I think that it's a little bit of a leap to say, let's look at AI like that. I totally get the worry, and I think it's appropriate. The thing that I find more worrying in a way is that people want to shun it, turn their back on it, not try and understand it, demonize it, say it's all awful and it's the collapse of society, etc., etc. It needs to be discussed. If the artistic community sort of turn their back on it and shun it in that same sort of way, the horrible term AI slop, there was a lot of painting slop. There was an awful lot of photography slop. There was a hell of a lot of Photoshop slop. So bad art or bad imagery, if we want to say that, has been in every medium. There's an awful lot of writing slop. If the artistic community decide they want to turn their back on it, it's not going to go away, and then who's left in charge of this? Big business and the military. When I started SHOWstudio, I was very much hoping that it could be a time for a different sort of connection as a species across this planet. It's the first time in our history we've been able to talk, across the globe to each other. So I think that's huge, huge, huge. And I think if the artistic community decide that they're going to turn their back on it and they just, think it's the worst thing, you are left with people developing it to make loads of money, which we can see, and also for the military, which awfully we can see happening at the moment. All those bombs are AI guided. So, you have to think that if that's the world you want to live in, and that's not the world I want to live in, and it's not the world I believe is possible. So I know we've got quite highfalutin already. We're already talking about big major concepts, but that's kind of how I sort of go into this.
But you said something really profound there, that currently it does kind of feel like the technocrats and the military are the ones that are dominating the conversation. And I wonder, I'll ask you too about what fascinates you about AI, Tom, but how do creators kind of become part of that conversation? Because it feels like it was a conversation that almost happened outside of creativity, and they were just told to kind of adopt something without kind of being able to be part of that.
The thing that needs to happen is people need to experiment with it and try things out. It's been around, AI's been around since what, the 50s, Tom?
Yeah,
when this Turing, that's the kind of beginning of it. Yeah. So it's been around for a long time, but only in public consciousness in the way it is now for the last sort of couple of years. We've got to experiment with it. And I've been sort of waiting for the art of the internet to manifest. And I think this AI intervention is helping that happen. So I think, it is going to become its own art form. So, I think it does need time, it does need encouragement, it does need support like any other medium to become brilliant. Rather than just being used to cut costs to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is helpful as well. Haven't got any money, you haven't got any money, it's helpful. But just to use it for that and to try and, drive wages down or so, it doesn't feel great. But it does need support somewhere to become its own self and not just a pastiche of other existing mediums.
Absolutely. And Tom, you started off in digital art, and I wonder what kind of drew you to AI when you first were encountering the medium. Were you thinking that it was helping processes, or was it just like a tool that you wanted to kind of explore further?
I think everything is, obviously I think there's two ways that you can kind of view AI and how it's used, and one is as an efficiency tool, and I think that's what causes a lot of anxieties in people, is because people see that it can cut costs, it can, you can get more out of it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's where a lot of anxiety comes from, quite rightly. But then just the curiosity of it as a kind of creative tool of what can we do with this, and where's it going to go? And I think that, that's what me and Nick share, is that curiosity of what is this thing? But I think because we have that curiosity, we started investigating it sort of, almost as soon as we could. In some way or another, the two of us have been working on it as soon as it was available to us. We've been trying to use it in some way. And I think because of that, we could start to see the potential downfalls of it, and where it might get used, and where people might get exploited, and where it might have an impact on the modelling industry, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was a big impetus to starting a new plane, was to say look, we're looking at this stuff, we're coming at it with integrity and with our sort of creative mindset, and using it for what we hope are good reasons and good purposes. But it's also trying to kind of educate people and talk to people as much as we can about look, this is where the potential downfalls of it are, and these are where the potential benefits of it are. It's just a level of curiosity of what's this thing? For sure. And it's kind of amazing what it can do. But
I think it's there's never been a time in the history of art where you can use your brain the way you can do now. I have a camera, or Michael and I are developing a camera, where you can point it at a scene or a person, and instead of creating a photograph, it will create a poem. Now that cross from the visual to the linguistic, art's divided into the musical, the linguistic, the visual. Normally the artists specialise in one category and don't cross over. Not many writers become great photographers. Sure. No, it's not complete true, but do you see what I mean? But AI helps you cross those different things. A prompt you write is a bit of poetry. Right. You have to know what your words are doing and what they're generating. But to get it back, if I'm not jumping the gun here, to the modelling industry and to models, I think there are two main reasons that we are excited and determined to make something work. Models normally, it's getting better, but they normally have quite a short lifespan as a model. So it's all focused on the beauty of youth. Models traditionally have a sort of 10-year career. It's changing now, it's getting longer, but
yeah.
certainly before it was a colour. And it got to a point, in the early 2000s, where models were having a one-season career.
For sure.
And that's what I think models, like any other career, need to be able to have a long, full lifetime career. So if it can be of benefit to longevity of their career, and if it can protect them, the way AI should be used is a protection for the model. The model has to own their own rights to the digital image. Right. That's really important. And then if somebody creates a deepfake of you, if somebody uses a likeness of you which you haven't said is okay, then you can stop them doing that. And that's what we want to try and set up.
Yeah.
Something that gives models the security that they're not going to be exploited in the digital age.
Right.
I don't want to go too far into this, but the modeling industry has not been great in terms of exploitation over the years. So I think we need to take this opportunity to try and help models.
Right.
If they're going to have a digital image, and they will, whether they like it or not, they will, because other people will create it. So a model needs to own their digital image and their digital assets, and that's partly what a new plane is trying to do.
Do you almost foresee it as a regulatory type of ownership over your image? Because that's also the conversation that's been coming up as far as how to enforce that. How to you talk about deepfakes, right? And that's come up a lot where, actors, Hollywood shut down for this for over a year because that was a really contentious point. And I wonder, how does the modeling and fashion industry kind of take that ownership when there's also this thought process of it's not just in America or in the UK, it's like, is it a system that now has to apply to the entire world?
It's a really, really complex topic, and I think one of the big issues is how the legal and legislative landscape is not really keeping up with the pace that the technology is moving. I think it's getting better, and we're starting to see stuff happen, but it's very different between Asia and Europe and America. We're talking specifically about the modeling industry. I think one of the key things that we think about is preparing for the future. We're not seeing digital twins all over the place now, but we're starting to see it get used quite a lot in e-commerce, for example. And e-commerce, does, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but prop up large parts of the modeling industry.
Absolutely.
We think there needs to be, in essence, an industry-wide response that is coherent, where they take control of it, or you take control of it. The modeling industry takes control of what may or may not happen. And we think that starts with capturing data, which is images, and digital twins of models, and transferring the ownership and making sure that ownership sits with the model.
I mean, I talked to the models, and the conversation about the avatar and the digital likeness was a bit contentious because there wasn't enough understanding how long they would hold that image. Is it in perpetuity?
Yes.
Let's say it's within a term, obviously you have your contract, but then it's not deleted. Technically, you still kind of have it in the cloud or the database, and it caused a lot of anxiety because there's this mindset that yes, maybe my career might be limited or within a certain period, but then who's profiting off of that? Is it gonna be me? Is it gonna be me, or is it my agency, or is it the company at large? Is it these huge fast fashion companies that need this type of process in order to be more efficient? And I think that we don't really know, right? We don't know until the conversation comes with regulation. And honestly, I think there's a lot to be said on both ends, right? The models themselves kind of have this mindset that, do I become less important if it's all digitally?
We don't see it that way. We see it that they should become more important, have more control of their careers and their destinies and how they're remembered and how they're represented. That, I think, is important. But it's hyper complex. Most of the laws are decided by lawsuits, so you and they haven't arrived yet. I'm sure they will, but they haven't arrived yet. So we're trying to work out legislation of this without any actual legislation happening.
And it's funny, you mentioned that mindset, and I think Corinne just recently said something very similar, where she's just like, I want to see what the next generation of whatever we're supposed to be doing right now is. And you talked about music videos when you spoke about Ye, but I also went back, did my Googles, and I saw that your first music video was with Bjork and Pagan Poetry. And I look back also to your first book, Skinheads, and I wonder, I watched the music video this morning while I was getting my matcha, and I was like, okay, maybe AI could be applied to this video, like retrospectively. You could use AI to kind of create all those like white baubles, and you see Bjork in there, but she kind of like becomes like amorphous, like it's just like not her. But could you use AI for skinheads? And I wonder, like, is the new current technology something that can achieve the magic of what you were able to capture in those moments? Because it was that music video very much felt like a technological advancement of what I've never seen before in a music video. So I wonder what your perspective is on that.
Well, Bjork's pagan poetry video was about her love for her then lover, and how she would put herself through any amount of physical pain to be with this person. And it was about lovemaking. And when she first approached me and said, I want to do a video about my love for blah, blah, I said, well, here's a camera, off you go. You know, go and film yourself making love to him. If that's what your video's about. And so some scenes in the film I couldn't show on MTV because they are people making love. So we had to find a way of kind of suggesting it to people who know what sex looks like. So if you're a minor, i.e. under 16, or under 18, whatever it is, under 16 I guess, you don't have a sex life, so you don't recognize sex. But the movement of sex in the pagan poetry video is abstracted. If you're an adult and you have a sex life, you can recognize the movements. It's about we're talking about Naomi's walk, to be honest. You know, but if you're a child, you can't. So it was a way of getting something which was about lovemaking, which is not a sin and should not be demonized and made to feel dirty about wanting to make love, which is most of our lives revolve around some form of it. So it was a sort of glorification, not a glorification, a celebration of her love and her sexuality. So we used a technique which was a Photoshop technique, I think, called median. Is it median? It was median. Yeah. Median, which turns things into sort of these. It's a retouching filter that it's normally applied at like 1%, and I applied it at 300%. So it turns it into these kind of rather beautiful, painterly, amorphous shapes, and it did the thing I wanted to do, which makes it still feel sensual, but doesn't feel explicit. The thing is that AI is in Photoshop. We talk about so people say, oh, I don't want to use AI. Well, AI is in every camera in this room. Every time you take a picture on your iPhone, it's in there. This morning it's on my satellite nav. You know,
it's in every email.
It's in every email. It's been in Photoshop for, God knows how long. It's in when people go and grade their film, it's in the grading material. It's everywhere. If you want to take it out, what do you want to go back to? Do you want to go back to pure photography, analog photography? Is that where we're questing to go? I don't feel that's very representative of where society is, but I think the sort of way that people talk about it as if we can just shut our laptops and become this idealized vision of what society was in when. You can't turn time back. We've learned things. You've opened doors. You've gone through them and into other rooms and into other rooms and other rooms. We're not the same. We can't go back. I just think we need to look towards the future. If we are in the fashion industry, the fashion is, by its definition, a prediction of the future. So we are in some way responsible for that. And so we should be trying to do that in some way.
It's all about who's behind it, not necessarily the tool itself. And I think that's where it kind of gets a bit gray in that area, because I wonder what you think about the most ethical way to train AI in terms of like putting forward images, because that's come up within the art world as far as whatever you're putting in, and now the output is based off of whoever's work that you either have permission to use or don't have permission to use. And so I wonder how you guys kind of approach training AI.
There's a lot of grey areas, and there's a lot of kind of ethical questions around all of that stuff. But I think, following on from what Nick was saying, is this, on one level, this feels like a sort of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where AI is changing things or has the potential to change things quite fundamentally. And I think, if we're talking about the model industry and we're talking about, fashion creative industries, there's parts of it that are quite broken. And what AI can potentially do is allow us to a moment in time where we can change it for the better, where models don't get exploited so much, their likenesses don't get exploited so much. And if we can create the sort of underlying systems that can work within that, then that's just for the benefit of everyone. So I think that's on the first point, that's worth saying. In terms of training AI, it's a big question. Without getting too technical about it, how we need to think about it is there's foundational models, which are what big tech are doing. I think the minimum is something like 14 billion images that you need to train to create a foundational model. Right. What a foundational model means is, what we're all seeing is what we can interact with and write a prompt and say, put 3 people on a chair in a white studio, and it does it. Right. It's been trained on minimum 14 billion. Google it's multiple times more than that. But that's what it is. That's what we're interacting when we're making images with AI. Like, we have to interact with those foundation models. How those have been trained, that's a big kind of grey area. Because they've just scraped the internet over everything that's ever been put online has now been scraped and put into those foundational models, often without permission, most of the time without permission, but a lot of the time with permission. So as we've been all interacting with Google and Meta and Instagram and WhatsApp, all the rest of it, for the last however many years, we've all been giving them our data and giving them the permission to use it. Sure. That's ultimately what's been happening. So there's nothing that we can change about that. Moving forward, there's stuff happening, but on a legislative level, in the US, nothing's going to be happening on a federal level, certainly for the next 2 years. Yeah. Certainly for the next 2 years. Yeah. Don't know about after that. In the EU and in China's a bit different. In the EU, it's starting to change, but again, it's like different responses from different people. The UK is kind of dragging its feet, and we're not in the EU anymore, so we're finding our own way through it. But long and short of it is a very, very complex situation. When we're training data and when we're interacting with AI, and a model and a digital twin for model is a really good example of this, we're using data that we have permission to use. So if we work with a model and we create a digital twin, we have that permission, we capture that data, which is ultimately a set of images, but we give the ownership of that data, those images, over to the model. So they're in charge on a contractual level what happens to it. And then that data creates a sort of it's called a fine tune or a LoRa, for technical terms. That is then the digital twin, but it's ultimately a kind of closed, sort of small AI training data set. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that when we interact with these foundational models that are built on billions of images, when we, with those things, we can say, 3 glasses on 3 glass tables. It knows what a glass looks like. It knows what a glass table looks like. If we just type in a person, we can say 3 people sitting on the chair. It's going to just make up those 3 people out of its, understanding. Yeah. That's been trained on all of the images of people that have come before it. So if we type in fashion model, it is going to use all of the data that it has of fashion models. Again, we're too late to stop that. That's already happened. With a digital twin, if we want, Kate Moss sitting in this chair, we use her data.
I think she was, actually.
So, I'm sure she has a number of times. We use her kind of data set, interacts with the foundational model and say, we want Kate Moss sitting in that chair. And it pulls from our data. It understands generally what a woman looks like, how light reacts, and how the room kind of works. And then it uses that data to replace a sort of generic person with Kate Moss. For example, we haven't done this with Kate. I don't want to kind of libel myself, but what that does is kind of show one of the problems with AI in the industry, where we can just type fashion model sitting in a chair. And that is what we're starting to see in e-com, for example. Mm-hmm. So we can make, and we term them as synthetic models. So that is a model that doesn't exist, but it's an amalgamation of all the images that these foundational models have of every fashion model that has had their picture taken and put on the internet. That needs to stop now. Synthetic models shouldn't be used in place of real models, because that's where we're wiping out jobs, and that's where we're stopping people earning the money, and that's where somebody along the chain is making money, and they're making probably quite significant amounts of money from it. So that's what we would like to kind of address, and that's why we think there needs to be, again, an industry-wide response from the modelling industry to say it is really important that you use the data that is allowed to be used to make representations of fashion models. And we've seen, like the Guess advert that made it into Vogue a few months ago, I think. Yeah, that was a synthetic model. So that was just entirely generated, just with the data from a foundational model that is, I want, somebody that looks a bit like a fashion model. No model has been paid for that. No model got any work from that.
It's the digital creator that gets paid.
Digital creator.
It reminds me of Little Michaela from like about 4 or 5 years ago, where we very much had these digitally created avatars that were put in place in pictures with real people, and so it kind of had that uncanny meta, you know, is she real, is she not real, is it just a head on top of a person's face, or like who's behind this, like who's the person, is even a person of color, like it's kind of all ambiguous. And essentially what you were saying is that essentially your whole archive's already in AI, it's already in this like open AI format. Does it change your relationship to how you even look at your own work, or maybe you have unpublished photos?
No, not really. I'll try and answer this in two ways. One, as an artist, I feel it's important that I shape the cultural vision, if you want, the cultural zeitgeist. If my work isn't included, my work is not shaping the cultural zeitgeist. That's one thing, so I quite like him being involved, you know. I don't mind that. If we can draw a little bit of parallel, because I know a lot of people are really concerned about plagiarism and AI. You know, when I go to the Victorian Albert Museum, I walk around, I see, you know, kind of beautiful sculptures there, and you know, fantastic kind of paintings and blah blah, and they all go into my brain. And then when I behind the camera, I'm thinking, oh, that looks brilliant, because I've seen it somewhere before, because it reminds me of a pre-Raphaelite painting, because it reminds me of a constructivist piece of artwork, because it reminds me of something. And therefore my acceptance of it and my enthusiasm for it is based subconsciously on things I've seen that I liked. Now that's how we work as people. It's very hard not to do that. If you have no artistic information whatsoever to pull on, that's an interesting idea, but I'm not quite sure how that happens. You know, because as artists we all train, you know, and you spend ages, and it was accepted as a thing you did. You know, you would spend, you know, back in the sort of Renaissance, you might spend 20 years mimicking another artist to be in the school of, learning how they paint, learning brushstrokes, etc., etc. So mimicking has always been part of it. But, you know, I think it's one of those natural things when you try and create something, you're instinctively pulling on things in the back of your mind that you like. Juxtaposition of colour, form, or whether it's more literal, etc., etc. So that's all part of the artistic world. We talk about not getting paid for our images being used, and I don't think it's beyond the power of AI to be able to recognise what they're pulling from and then reimburse the artist. Happens in music. Every time somebody does a campaign, the process of doing a campaign in this industry is you start off and say, let's do a mood board. And up it goes. There's the Alexander McQueen image, and there's the Iris Van Herpen image, and there's a, you know, Merton Marcus, and a kind of Craig McDean, and a blah blah blah. And they're all stuck on the wall. Everybody gets right. Yeah, it's a bit to this, and that's how they shape the campaign for Prada, for Balenciaga. It's done with it. It's very de rigueur now to show you mood boards, but that's just referencing other people's imagery and using those images to inspire your vision. Better people do it to inspire, not so exciting people do it just to copy, you know, but that's part of the business. And I've never been paid to have one of my pictures on a mood board. I think they've been on a few. So, you know, it is a slightly kind of, it's not as clear cut as one might think. Right. It isn't just scrolling through and nicking people's images and that's bad. That's sort of how artists work in any case, and it's sort of how human creativity works, and it's sort of how the business works. So, you know, it's very hard to outlaw against that or to legislate against that.
And it recently came up because there was a recent legislation in America where an artist tried to petition for AI-generated art to be copyrighted, and they lost the bet. Like, they lost the conversation, and it was quite controversial. I saw the special on 60 Minutes, and I thought that it got really blurry, because I did see a little Nicolene, and I did see a little like XYZ, and the artist tried to say like, no, this is its own thing. This amalgamation of all these things, it's its own thing. And, you know, the artists that were kind of getting pulled from, rightfully so, were a little bit, you know, perturbed about it. And it's the difference between using your own work versus using someone else's, which, you know, it is brought up in mood boards a lot. But I wonder, do you guys kind of feel like there has to be certain ways that we all creatively go about working with this process?
I think so. It kind of like, there's quite a few different ways that one and we interact with AI, and there's a lot of kind of off-the-shelf services that anyone can, you know, go and sign up for, often a free account, and use. On a number of them, you can really quite specifically, you know, if I wanted to, I could just go and take a bunch of stuff from Nick's Instagram, screenshot it, feed it into that, and say, make me images that look a bit like this. Copyright law is like quite a funny thing. Like, it's certainly not up to scratch, anyway, close to being up to scratch for how AI, you know, currently functions. So I think there needs to be like a new way of thinking around that. But copyright law does protect things on a commercial level. just as a sort of side note, there's also the kind of worry that models have around their likeness being used without their permission. The law already exists to stop that, and part of that is a copyright thing, but also a big part of that in Europe is the GDPR. There's the EU AI kind of act that's being phased. There's starting to be guardrails put in place where you have to have metadata within the image, and the metadata can give you some information about how that image was created.
And also we try and build as much as we can our own data sets. So we try and create a bank of images on a particular subject, so we're putting much less or not at all on the sort of general thing. And I think that's also an important thing to consider.
The practical way of what I've seen in the past year, which of AI being used to photo shoots, has really been putting it in certain elements that like maybe it would be hard to kind of capture, like a lightning bolt in the background. And it seems to be a good additive tool in that sense of trying to kind of create something that, like you mentioned, hasn't been seen. How has it been that you've practically applied it? Is it an enhancement or is it the whole canvas? That's really what my question is.
No, it's part of the whole thing. It's like Photoshop in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Photoshop in lots of different ways, but it's a bit like Photoshop. So Photoshop isn't the whole of the photographic process, it's part of it. Right. And you can use it to retouch a mole you don't like the look of it, or you can use it to make the neck
Super
2 foot long.
Yeah,
You can. It's in the hand of the artist, to be honest, how much you use it. It's as interesting as the artist using it. If the artist is not very good, they'll not be very good whether they're using analog photography, painting, singing, whatever. They're not very good. They're not very producing art, which is very satisfying, to watch, to see, to hear, to whatever it is. It's the same with AI. I think the thing with AI, and where we're seeing it a lot, is it's a lot of people can do it, and that's not bad. One of the things I love about Instagram, and what was one of the criticisms of Instagram, was it's just people taking selfies. Well, great. That's really nice that people are managing to start to understand themselves through imagery. Because prior to this, back in analog photography days in the 1980s and going further back, very few people could take a self-portrait. Cindy Sherman, great. But now everybody can. Well, that's great. That's a bit like the writing analogy. When the ballpoint pen was invented, lots of people could write. Didn't make lots of Shakespeare's, but probably made a couple of people. Before it was just a bunch of kids at the Bauhaus. Let's democratize art. Let's democratize this vision, not because you will produce 1,000 Shakespeares but because you might at least let people appreciate how you make photography, art, imagery, film, poetry, etc., etc. Those media. They need support, and this is in some ways helping to do that. It's allowing people to be able to communicate artistically, and I think that's really important.